Welcome to another episode of Comics Connects. As we increasingly rely on SaaS, web and AI-powered applications, the browser is now the new frontline in enterprise security. And in this episode, I'm excited to talk about how integrating Citrix Secure Private Access with Google Chrome Enterprise Premium extends zero trust protection directly to the browser. And I'm delighted to introduce Noriko Katsuyama from Google and Richard Parnell from Citrix to discuss how the partnership between these two technology giants is helping to put security right at the moment a user interacts with corporate data. We'll explore what this means in practice as it relates to seamless access without agents, identity-aware controls, data loss prevention, and browser-level threat protection. Noriko and Richard, welcome to Comics Connects.
My name is Noriko Katsuyama, and I've worked with Google and for Chrome for almost 8 years now. And I've played various different roles, always sort of helping our customer leverage the best or understand what we do in the enterprise. But most recently, I lead the customer engineering and architects team. So I have a smart bunch of technical folk that we get to talk to our customers to help them leverage the best of what we do for them.
Thanks, Noriko. Richard.
So Richard Parnell, I'm an Account Technology Strategist, and for those who do know me, I've been around Citrix for 24 years now, in various roles, but predominantly in pre-sales, in the technical customer roles within Citrix, and primarily working with the enterprise space these days.
Let's start with the bigger picture. So I mentioned around enterprise applications are evolving, and we've seen it obviously over the past decades. It's taking a little while for organizations to really start thinking about a different way of approaching the way applications could and should be delivered. But Richard, perhaps starting with you, what's really driving the shift, you think, from traditional Windows applications to the web?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Nick. I think the predominance of the evolution of applications comes from the modernization of the technologies that actually those applications are running on. So the platforms themselves, the actual coding languages and structures that go with that. But I think the number one factor is the usability or the user experience of those applications. What we're seeing is the evolution of users through the consumer space over time and the internet and all these things. People are so comfortable with the browser as an interface these days that it makes really obvious sense within the corporate space and the commercial spaces to give them that interface that they're used to using. Doesn't matter if it's a complex application or a very simple application. The users in this space, they know how to use the browser. It's intuitive. So for most enterprises, the ability to modernize that application and move it from a legacy style of application to the more modern browsers makes it much, much simpler for the users to interact with.
That's a really interesting point because it's great for the users, but now we've got to talk about IT. We've got to talk about security. So if you're agreeing that perhaps the browser is the new enterprise endpoint, what should organizations be thinking about access, security, to complement the productivity for the users?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, and it's always an interesting balance when you start weighing up user experience, where users are the ones who are typically putting in the complaint tickets about an application and how it performs, the security and protection of the corporate data, and security and protection of the users themselves. A lot of the time users don't know what they're doing that is causing a security problem. So the ability to take that browser, and I'll refer exactly what we're doing with Google, approaching that zero trust approach that a lot of organizations want to have, where you can deliver out to the endpoint that native browser experience because that is the best experience that you can deliver. But when you're working with the industry leader in browser technology, who actually brings that level of security to that browser, whether it be data leak prevention, whether it be extensions and profile management and all these things that the Google platform brings, it makes absolute sense that we can now look at the three layers, which is, user experience, security, and then access and delivery. Having those three things is key.
No, that's really insightful. I suppose from my consideration, that enterprise threat landscape doesn't just start at and end at the login. It really lives the in-between moments. What are users doing? And you touched on that from a productivity side of things. But I think a consideration could be around when customers, and they'll hear about it hopefully today from you both, when you're pairing the industry leader in how you deliver secure applications being Citrix, and how do you extend that Citrix trust boundary into the leader in the browser, you can start connecting your internal corporate applications more securely. There are no agents needed to be installed. You just need to install the Chrome browser in its simplest form. Am I on the right path there?
I might hand that one off to Noriko, actually, and get her thoughts on how simple it is.
Well, I think that that's really one of the big benefits of a browser-centric approach to not only application delivery, but to how people work, right? I think one of the things, going back to the questions before, what's accelerating use of the browser, I think, we're way past it now, but when we were in 2020 and COVID and everything was shutting down, forced everyone outside the network, the corporate network. And I think that made a huge push. It was a necessary push for customers to have to figure out, how do we keep working? And so for that reason, having a way to securely then provide access to those applications in the browser was almost imperative, right? And now, but the thing is, there's that trade-off to the fact that not all those applications can move to a web app trivially, right? There's always going to be those thick apps, those client apps. And so that's where the best of this partnership work. Like Citrix is able to now give you that secure access to those critical applications that just can't be browserized, if that's a word, but then also being able to then provide a better experience, right? For people working off the network, having to log in every time to the VPN, then sign into VDI, or having to have extra steps, but also some performance issues, performance gaps in the way, really steps into the productivity element. It just sort of takes that experience down for an end user. So I think in this case, you really get the best of both. You get the performance and the place where applications can work best for web apps that are designed for a browser, and yet you still have that continuity through securely accessing those thick apps with our Citrix partnership.
Yeah, and I actually think you're really spot on with that. Citrix brings that, with 40 years into secure access. That's what we've done. That's what we do. Didn't matter what the application was. Didn't matter what the network was. Doesn't matter what the device is. When you partnered that mentality with focusing the delivery through a browser, and then bringing the Google platform of security the ability to secure that browser the way you need to, that combination of multi-layers of security now means that you can simplify all the components that are in line. You don't need complex, inspection systems and all these kind of things going on. You've got the two worlds that are going to deliver that application for you. You've then got the simplicity or the anonymity of the security at the user level. They don't know the security is behaving on their behalf. That's the great thing about it. It's just they're protecting them, protecting the data, protecting the application, the screen scraping, the captures, all these wonderful things that we have at both levels. So we're protecting the browser, we're protecting the connection. Google is then bringing all this security at a ZTNA level and a browser level that we couldn't do without them in real essence. So from IT's perspective, it's a great partnership because they can simplify everything. They can tick the boxes of cyber and security checks and all those reviews that go on. They can stabilize a very simple user experience platform as well.
On that level of like protecting the user, right? And you have the benefit of our baked-in threat intelligence. So when a lot of that risk to the user is through phishing attacks, right? Being maybe being misled to a malicious site to put in information, being able to leverage the baked in Google Safe Browsing to sometimes you want to alert the user actually with a scary red interstitial to say, hey, this is actually not a good site. This is not the site you think you're looking for, and prevent users and educate users to not put in data, not put in credentials that otherwise could be missed. So that is the benefit you get, and you get the benefit of the fact that with Google and with Chrome, when you have billions of users using the internet, we have the ability to see those, malicious sites, malicious files that are coming up all the time, real time, that we're able to protect our users that use our services globally, but also our enterprise users that are then going to use Chrome with Citrix.
Yeah, and I love that, right? So, yeah, think of everything Noriko just said in how they're protecting the user. Take all of that input, if you like, back into Citrix, and then we can decide, do we need to sandbox that application? Do we need to deliver it natively? Do we need to deliver it in a different way to add on to that protection for the company? This is fantastic, right? This is what can be done with this partnership.
I'm going to touch on a couple of points you both made, but Noriko mentioned when we were all forced into lockdown and be able to work from home. Organizations weren't necessarily ready for that. We all saw a scramble on how are we going to enable this to work. Let's face it, not every organization understands what an enterprise browser is or how to securely deliver your applications in SaaS and web environments. So if we take that back and try and simplify what this discussion could be about is organizations at that time were forced to ensure users can gain access, whether it be through legacy VPN solutions or just allowing them to work from home from a domain joined device, and you can use any browser you want. But now the organization should not underestimate really how big a shift this should be, where we've spoken about the browser now being the endpoint, now being how people work. So we've spoken a little bit about policies, but how big of a fundamental shift or concern should not having an enterprise browser solution be for organizations, whether you're a supersized bank or whether you're a smaller organization? Talk to me a little bit around both of your thoughts around how does the size or how does the IT manager shift towards a secure browser mentality?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've been peddling browsers in Chrome for 8 years now, and it's amazing, and I'm still here, and I think a large part of it is because how much the the technology has evolved around the browser, but within the browser itself. So I think, when I first started, it was just Chrome and IE, and it was easy. It was an easy choice between those two, especially since, compatibility and performance just worked. But fast forward to today, where many of the applications are being served through the cloud or through SaaS apps, um, getting to a point where a lot of customers have not realized that we've started to build in these capabilities into the browser. They've always felt that, oh, we need to work around the browser and mitigate around the browser, not actually leveraging the capabilities within. We've had policies baked in for a long time to be able to manage, but to be able to do things with what we see in the browser uniquely, right? All data is being decrypted at the end, where a lot of men in the middle technologies are either difficult to do, expensive to do, and or not possible, because as applications move to TLS 1.3, a lot of that is now breaking. So you're losing critical visibility to applications as they modernize themselves. But the browser sees all of that. And when you get that full context, and when you have the telemetry to be able to say, hey, at this time, this user went here and did this, all of that context in a single audit log really helps with, first of all, giving context to what's happened and then be able to quickly remediate. I think those are the things that a lot of customers maybe are not aware of still. Although I do believe that that's changed over the last 2 years. I really do see like an elevated awareness of what we can do. But that's definitely an area to explore if you haven't already.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to add on to that, I think, as Noriko kind of laid out there, the biggest change in what's the difference between a browser and an enterprise browser is, number one, visibility. Visibility of what the browser's doing, what the application's doing, what the users are doing, and being able to understand how the browser is being used by the user, right? The second piece is then applying contextual security. That has been one of the biggest changes in browser technologies that I've seen, is this ability to, whether it's via an extension or the inbuilt in the browsers themselves, you're able to provide context based upon where, when, why, how the user is using that browser. It's very, very different to the old mentality of we just locked it down, or we just did this, and you couldn't do the things that you needed to do necessarily in your job. I think the third piece of that, and Google's been at the forefront of this, and a lot of the browser technologies out there have followed suit, is delivering all of this through a profile mentality, right? So having my profile as an enterprise employee and having my profile as me are seen as two very different worlds within this. So I think from the end user's perspective, they understand that if I log in with my corporate credentials, I get my corporate profile, I get my corporate security, I get my corporate applications that I need to do what I need to do. And that does not impact their personal world anymore, the way it used to. And so I think that's the biggest change that I've seen within the enterprise browser versus where the browser started.
Yeah, I think to add to that too, right? I think for Chrome, I think this is not really well known or well understood, but Chrome and a Chrome browser that you use at home already and a Chrome enterprise browser, really the power of what we do is just being able to apply policy to convert that browser in place, and that's really through what you described before, Richard. It's that profile. I call it the power of the profile. Like when you sign in, suddenly all of those corporate policies come into place, and that experience is now going to be managed and controlled, by the customer. But that personal profile is not touched. So you really have that separation between, and that allows your users and actually companies to explore different modes of work, right, safely. I think a lot, if we look at some of the exfiltration or data events, security events that have happened, a lot of the times it's because companies are trying to work with models like a partnership, third-party partnership, or a contractor, where they had to give access to applications. Maybe they allowed them to do it on a device they didn't own, and it wasn't in a way that they could be able to really limit where that access is coming from and or seeing what's happening. And so for that reason, now when you can use Chrome and allow a contractor to say sign into the corporate profile, now that company now has visibility to that user coming in and controls to say, hey, if you're coming onto a device that we don't own, we might be a little bit more rigid and controlled on what we do with what you can do with that data. So it really opens up different modes of work, which I think helps businesses and companies either save on costs of having to ship managed devices to partners and then having to manage that, but also really move quickly if they're, say, onboarding with an M&A, being able to bring those users into their corporate applications more quickly.
Actually, I think you touch on a really great point there, because with that profile capability and the policy delivery, one of the challenges has always been on those unmanaged devices. They don't even have to be BYO. They could be a third-party corporate device that you don't manage. You don't have to install anything. Chrome is typically always there. What you're doing by having the profile mechanism is, as Noriko said, you're changing the mode of the browser without actually having to put an agent out there, without having to put a contract in place that says, to access our world, you need XYZ installed on these devices. And then IT doesn't have to manage it at the end of the day. So, this is a fantastic way to deliver out to those styles of devices, where I know a lot of my customers, they have, Citrix Workspace app, that's part of the contract of a third party, but now delivering the application icon through that and then launching the right profile in Chrome means they get the best user experience, they get the best security, they get the best ability to deliver that without company A having to manage and install anything. And also company B for that matter. Company B doesn't have to manage or install anything. It's just Chrome, which is great.
I think this is why the evolving partnership between Citrix and Google is so important. We'll get into that a little bit more shortly, but from what I've understood from you both and your impassioned pitch for this is, irrespective of whether the web application is inside the corporate network or accessible as a SaaS or web app service on the public internet, IT users or users that IT need to control can access them seamlessly without getting anything more than having Chrome Enterprise Premium within their arsenal. Because policies are no longer dependent really on the infrastructure or the agents or even the device. Citrix and Google together can assist the user to do their work, to be productive, working on a personal laptop, whether it be between corporate and personal identities. So the organizations who aren't on this path or thought already can now have real-time control. And I suppose if I was to paraphrase it, what you're both talking about, this isn't about security around the browser, it's about security within it and controlled by the IT team. Is that the right way we should be thinking about this?
Well, from our perspective, it's actually all of those things. So it's security within the browser, and that's what the Chrome Enterprise platform really does bring better than anybody. But then we supply all the bubble that goes around that. So we actually protect what's around the browser, what it connects to, what applications might be going with that. What's the endpoint look like from a perspective of compliance and those kind of things as well. You mentioned SaaS-based applications, and Noriko, I'd love your opinion on this. I think they are the most challenging applications enterprises ever had to face, because up until now, whether it be legacy-based applications or web-based applications, they were inside the organization. They were custom built. They were delivered, whether it was through Citrix as a published application or desktop. It might have been a published browser back in the day that was living in those to access the web and the web internal applications. And you could control that. Security knew where the data was. Security knew where the access points were. They knew what the network looked like, the encryption, all those wonderful things. Now you've got applications that don't live there. Those SaaS applications are living everywhere today. And you can say they live in cloud, but they could be in any zone or region or data center of those clouds around the world at any time, depending upon your regular load balancing and all those things that go on with applications. And a lot of the time, a user is told, you can access it through this method of coming inside the network and accessing a browser inside there, and then you're going out a corporate network structure to go to those public apps, and it's a horrible experience. Yes, it might be more secure for that user to do it that way, but you end up with no control over the data at the back end anyway. You might overcomplicate the security, so you're delivering a poor performance on the application's delivery itself. And quite frankly, with the modernization of the browser and Citrix as a whole, it's not required anymore. It really isn't the right kind of architecture for delivering these kinds of applications anymore, where you want the security of bringing somebody internal for those internal-based applications, but you want them to break out. You want them to go directly to those applications now. So the challenge for IT that I always saw was, okay, well, how do you know what they're doing? What's your visibility over that? What's the security that you're going to apply for that secondary breakout network or application within that? And Citrix has done a lot over the years, and even more recently with things like our session recording technologies, that if you launch, we can record the session. We can do all the relevant security around those things and allow an understanding, I'll call it, from an organizational perspective. But I think, as Noriko mentioned earlier, the COVID period really drove an ability for enterprise visibility into those SaaS applications like we never saw before. You know, accessing a Salesforce or any of those styles of applications was kind of originally thought of, oh, I'm obtaining a service from you, you're going to protect me. And that's really not what happens, right? We need the Chrome Enterprise platforms effectively to help that protection and help that visibility.
Yeah, I mean, to call out visibility specifically around SaaS apps is just shadow IT is a problem, right? And not being able to know where your users are going, or leveraging technologies that you haven't sanctioned, right? Like that is, I mean, maybe they're putting stuff out into an unsanctioned cloud storage. So being able, with Chrome, being able to see what applications you're going to, what sites you're going to is one part of it. But you can also leverage the controls to even start blocking categorically, literally, to sites to not only protect against going to unsanctioned apps, but also to unsanctioned categories of places where you might likely cross paths with a malicious site or some sort of, malicious download that could then do more damage to your user and to your device. And so that's where you can also leverage one of those Chrome capabilities with our platform.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes back to that profile segmentation, right? Yeah, if I want to go jump on a website and do some personal, viewing of social medias or any of those kinds of, it is completely kept separate to that professional profile, and I think that's one of the biggest keys to that.
If you allow that for users.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, if you allow
I mean, everybody has an ad you can click on, right?
Yeah, everyone's got that. Noriko, where you're in the product engineering, you have lots of insight. You're listening and taking on board feedback from organizations. But perhaps you can share a little bit around what are you hearing from IT leaders about productivity, standardization of how users access their digital workspace, and I suppose also how do they manage that at scale? What could you share around some of your conversations there?
I think we're starting to move into this age of generative AI with productivity, right? I think that sorry, it's just it's in the zeitgeist of where we are right now. And I actually, when we were talking about shadow IT, I was thinking, the really new category of all of that is really generative AI. Like, are you using GenAI or not is a whole other thing, right? But I really feel like even from a year ago where customers are like, tell me how to turn all this stuff off. Now the conversation around productivity is around how do I leverage this quickly but safely and not at the compromise of our data accidentally. Either tainting your model, right, through prompts that you're trying to do there, or by accidentally, exfiltrating data through using that platform. So, and since a lot of this is consumed in the web as well, Chrome is able to then help protect you from going to unsanctioned generative AI sites or unsanctioned generative AI services to then pushing them towards what you would be okay with, and then still protecting what you put into those prompts as well. So I think that that's a big part of what's in the conversation with respect to productivity.
Part of that, I would assume, is suppose organizations have a responsibility to train their users of how to use this in an appropriate manner. What do you allow into this? How do we secure organizations sharing how they secure corporate data versus write me a poem for my child's homework type discussion. But I suppose moving a little bit on from the AI piece and that big discussion, it'd be really interesting to get your insights on not only sharing examples where you see that the Citrix Google partnership is making a difference, but how do we tie that in with organizations evolving their zero trust guardrails and making this work in reality for them?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I've been a big advocate for where we are today with the browsers and the application evolution, because it all comes down to the personas of your workforce, right? And personas is a really big thing, and I've been pushing this for quite a long time for customers to sit down and understand their user base, understand what they do, not just their job function, but actually how they use applications, which applications they use, understand who they interact with and what they interact with within your organization, and then build application solutions appropriately. So, if I look at Citrix and I look at Secure Private Access and Chrome Enterprise Platform, we class that combination typically under the modern worker because they are more web-based applications or SaaS-based applications than they are those legacy-based. So we can categorize that type of worker. Then you've got other workers who potentially, do need a full virtual desktop or graphics cards and more power user levels, but it's still going to be a combination of those applications moving forward. They're still going to have the web and SaaS like everybody else, but they're going to need that on a different delivery platform, for instance. So I think it's really, really important to understand that persona-based approach to your entire workforce of what you're delivering to, because that also shapes security. It also shapes whether or not they fit a model of ZTNA versus some other model within your organization. And so for me, it's an absolute no-brainer that you need to understand that before you can just blanket deliver things to people.
Yeah, Noriko, what could you add to that conversation? I think we can think of that user experience access and how you're having those conversations with IT. What's your position around what Richard has shared there?
Yeah, I think we just announced our partnership less than a year ago, and I think even in that time, we've seen a lot of interest from our joint customers, right? I think the biggest part, I think, with enterprises adopting and modernizing is the change management, and having to introduce a whole new tool, whole new user education, all of that, and the user workflow is very disruptive and hard to do. So what I really love about what I'm seeing our customers talking about is when they realize, whoa, if I already have a Citrix platform license and I have Citrix and I have Chrome, I can just do a couple of things to turn things on, and I suddenly have tremendous visibility and value that I can start to begin my journey. It's a much easier way. We've seen customers before this partnership that we've been talking to say, yeah, this is interesting, but maybe we don't have budget or we don't have the right thing. But then after doing this, a lot of those, and these are some of the largest Fortune Global 500 customers out there, right? And so that's the unique Venn diagram of these customers that want to move there, but have a lot of complexity, including things that are hard to modernize. So being able to give them the tools now through the licenses they already own to be able to start moving in that journey in the waves and in the way they're ready to move, to Richard's part. Not everyone's able to just turn on a switch and be there. But I think what I've really seen over the last less than a year of this partnership is just the customer seeing that, I guess, the best of those both worlds, that they can continue to move with their Citrix work, Chrome as well, but start to marry some of that value that comes together to get them into a better space. We're not there yet, but when we're able to get to a user experience where they're using the Citrix workspace and just being able to click on those icons just as they are, but instead we'll just replace one with the web, with the Chrome application. So now it's going to be a better user experience, less latency because we're not pushing them through, hoops and pinning through networks, and that'll all be seamless to the end user. I think that kind of vision and journey is what really gets our customers excited.
Yeah, and to add to that, because it's only been a year, Citrix has had its previous enterprise browser built into the Citrix workspace for quite a long time. So the concept of this is now not foreign to the organization, especially here in ANZ. We've got quite a few customers who have the Citrix enterprise browser that they use today to launch those internal based applications with secure private access. The transition is now where we're at, right? Within this last year, we now have a number of customers who are in that transition phase. They've got CPL or Citrix Platform License. They're now they've evolved from what enterprise browser from Citrix could deliver, right? And the reason, one of the biggest reasons is because Google has this huge engine at the back end and all these things that enterprise browser never had. So now we can transition, and we are actually transitioning a number of customers off the old enterprise browser and into this new world of Chrome Enterprise platform under those Citrix platform licenses, because their users are already educated on what they need to do. They click an icon and it launches Chrome, right? So from my perspective, it's actually an easier conversation now.
What they've got and what Citrix customers had access to.
Correct. Yeah. Because the feedback we were getting was, why do I have to launch that browser? Why can't I just launch the Chrome that I have? And that makes a lot of sense, right? They do everything else in it. Why don't I do my corporate applications in that as well? So from my perspective, out in the field and talking to the likes of some large telecommunications companies and banks and these guys in ANZ, the conversation is actually really easy because the license is already there. The methodology or the ideology behind launching a browser instead of launching a virtual something from Citrix is now established. And all we're doing is we're bringing the best of breed of the market of browsers in to join us on that.
And then they don't have to manage a different browser on top of that.
Correct.
Right? If they already
Correct.
have Chrome, why add
Yep.
more to the IT load and the burden? Because, by the way, they all have to be updated.
Well, that's actually still one of the benefits, how Chrome updates itself as well.
Right. We have a lot of controls. Not everyone likes the auto update, right? Let's be real. There's some customers out there that are like, I'd rather be back many releases back, which is a terrible, but I get it. You have to balance the risk and the operational continuity if your apps just can't keep up. But really, to the point I was trying to make is, yeah, when Chrome has and Google has the infrastructure to support safely upgrading billions of devices, we have that infrastructure, and to roll them back, by the way. We have a lot of controls, and that's the other benefit of being managed in the cloud with Chrome is no longer do you have to be beholden to a user signing on to the corporate network to get policy updates or updates. We can just push all of that straight to the user. If there's like a critical security fix you need on that browser, we can push it immediately. And not only that, but you can get the visibility to what versions are out there in your browser, so you can really try to focus your mitigation on getting those out-of-date browsers up to date as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I guess the one add-on I'd put to that is the fact that Google allows us to keep the corporate identities as well. It doesn't necessarily have to, an organization doesn't have to change their identity structure just to work with the Chrome Enterprise platform either. So, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't recognize straight off the bat is Google provides all this flexibility, all this, safety, but at the same time, you can still use, Richard at company to log on, right? And that's one of the keys. It's not a big change to the end user with that.
Right. We have a lot of controls. Not everyone likes the auto update. Right. Let's be real. There's some customers out there that are like, I'd rather be back many releases back, which is a terrible, but I get it. You have to balance the risk and the operational continuity if your apps just can't keep up. But really, to the point I was trying to make is, yeah, when Chrome has and Google has the infrastructure to support safely upgrading billions of devices, we have that infrastructure, and to roll them back, by the way. We have a lot of controls, and that's the other benefit of being managed in the cloud with Chrome is no longer do you have to be beholden to a user signing on to the corporate network to get policy updates or updates. We can just push all of that straight to the user. If there's like a critical security fix you need on that browser, we can push it immediately. And not only that, but you can get the visibility to what versions are out there in your browser, so you can really try to focus your mitigation on getting those out-of-date browsers up to date as soon as possible.
What I found interesting so far in this conversation is we've spoken about how people still are working, whether that's putting lots of point solutions in place to try and get to an outcome, and they've always done it that way, so they will continue doing it that way, or lots of infrastructure and components needed to deliver an outcome. What's the exciting part for me is as my career has evolved, leading with Citrix Technologies, where they are still the best in the business around secure delivery of application. And we have this massive beast of Google and the way that they deliver a secure digital workspace in the browser. Those organizations, the security people, the CIO, even the CFO can look at this and say, not only could we consider simplifying how we do work, we can potentially save some money and have a better user experience. That's what's really exciting about this partnership. And ideally, if people listening to this or viewing this get to see that and go, maybe I should be thinking more seriously about Citrix now in this era, rather than what I used to know them for, and their partnership with Google, that could be a really powerful proposition for the way we work as an organization. Am I on the right track of how what you're both talking to customers about, how they're seeing their eyes being opened by this partnership?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. My conversations at the executive level within my customers is all about cost optimization. It's all about efficiencies. It's all about what value can something bring back to the business. And I see a lot of those executives not questioning the decisions that have been made in the past, but looking to reevaluate the value a piece of technology might be bringing when this solution is on the table for them. And that's a very different conversation to what a lot of organizations have had, especially through the COVID era, where they were, we need more security, we need to lock things down more because we don't know where people are, and all these kinds of scenarios, where in fact now what we're offering organizations is a way to simplify that model moving forward. Are they going to get rid of their SIEM platforms and all these kind of things? They're not, because they want to pump data and information into those. But what they might reevaluate is, do I need that particular security tool anymore? Or do I need that particular setup of security and user identity or whatever it might be? What value is it still bringing to the organization?
Yeah, I would say where the COVID era really pushed the boundaries and pushed some of those I'm never going to put stuff in the cloud naysayers, like really, it was amazing because again, I've been here 8 years, talking to some of these customers that we're never going to put stuff in the cloud. Suddenly, that just broke the model, and it really pushed a new paradigm of okay, wow, we can work off network. Well, we need to find different ways to do that safely, and that's when I would like to say we thought about doing this before COVID, like we knew this was coming, but we didn't. We just started to build in these integrated security capabilities because we thought this is where we think this would be helpful for customers. And here it was, that came in, and suddenly now it's like, wow, if we can actually do all of the integration and security in the browser with productivity already there, this makes sense. So really looking at how the browser can unlock and sort of free people from the way they've done endpoint security, the agent in the corporate network, right? The perimeter, that type of structure was just kind of unquestioned until I think things broke. And then it kind of freed up new models, freed new ways to actually look at things, and also the business was pushing for it. We have partnerships, we have M&As, we want to move fast. And when you don't need to now have to ship a device and to put a bunch of agents on it and all of that stuff, that is where I've seen a lot of executives kind of have those aha moments, like, wow, this is going to unlock new ways of working, new efficiencies. And then what I think is now we're on the cusp of this is where does generative GenAI actually come in and then help unlock even more productivity? We're seeing the web becoming this space of agentic work, right? And so having to be in a space where your workers and your applications are ready for that, I think is really the next, inflection point where customers want to be. And so I think this partnership together allows those customers, especially those big ones that have, complex environments and big costs, be able to start to move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
You touch on an interesting point, and this conversation might actually provoke that a thought in listeners, which is, that's great. We can look at the browser, we look at the secure delivery application, but if we look at the personas and the device they're working on, What's the impact on the endpoint? Is it still the weakest link, or can it start becoming more of a real strength in that security chain? Richard, perhaps I'll pass that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. What is an endpoint anymore, right? When it comes to applications. So if you're talking about physical devices, I think they are heading towards being almost anonymous in this. They still have to be checked and secured, and you know there are technologies we have to do that with device trust and other things. But from the corporation's perspective, you really are getting to that any device approach that we've been calling out for many years, because the actual delivery mechanism is the browser, not the operating system, not the physical laptop or the thin client or whatever it might be. It is it is the browser container, I'll call it, or the browser application itself, that is almost the operating system for all of these applications. You know, I made the comment to someone the other day who made the comment that Windows and Mac have these wonderful multiple desktop screens that you can flip between and put things on, and I went, yeah, I call them browser tabs.
Yes.
Right? That's essentially what they've gone and developed, because the browser is so effective at this now that the endpoint is almost anonymous. It doesn't need to be known. It doesn't need to be, thought about, other than, I need to do some moderate checks on the endpoint to make sure everything that the browser is running on is safe. And if it's not, then I need to put some protections around that, right? So for me, it is almost becoming, we don't care what the endpoint is. As long as you've got that browser, as long as you've got Citrix and that browser together, you are going to be safe. You're going to deliver the right applications. You're going to deliver it in the right context. You're going to deliver them safely. You're going to deliver them with the best user experience. And really, user could go to JB Hi-Fi tomorrow and just buy a laptop, right? Or buy a Mac or whatever they want to do their job. That true BYO is coming.
I think there you touched on a real point. The endpoint should be part of the consideration. As somebody's looking at their application delivery strategy, what are you doing about securing your endpoint strategy? Do you need to have a Microsoft E3 or E5 license for that persona, particularly that you spoke to, Richard? How do we look at a frontline license? Because we can deliver that securely through a browser, control it, and make sure, to Noriko's point, if you're going to be using agentic type tools and you want to secure your corporate data, then do we need a separate application, or do we deliver that through the browser? And therefore that endpoint and those separate agents and the burgeoning back end of how do we manage and secure this, that endpoint cost could go down and the security considerations on it can evolve accordingly, which could lead to cheaper costs, cheaper way of operating, and a better outcome to drive that productivity gain. That's what I'm thinking you're both talking about, almost that utopia view, where organizations can do that right now if they come on the journey better together with Citrix and Google Chrome.
I'd also like to point out, and a shout out to maybe a good corporate citizen, to say that we do have Chrome OS, and I think that that's where, when you really are at a point, it's not everyone is ready to move there, but in certain cases, we're seeing customers seeing personas that don't need a powerhouse Mac. They don't need to manage, operating systems that might need a little bit more care and feeding, or have more, possibility of, having file executables to potentially corrupt the operating system itself and have to worry about the device itself being malicious. So now when you have Chrome browser running on Chrome OS, where it's a read-only platform, now you don't have to even worry about any sort of malware running, because it just won't. And I think that's a really, when customers, it's interesting to see the journey when they start to see how the browser can be how they centrically provide application and work. Then they're like, well, you're right. They're coming to the same conclusions as you are, and it's really great to see those light bulb moments. They're almost like, so why don't we could use a Chrome OS. Why not? We could. There's nothing else that's really blocking us. Previously to that, it was the apps, right? And now when everything is being in the browser and Chrome OS is optimized for that, and from a security layer as well, it's really interesting to see customers also come to that kind of same conclusion.
Yep, and you're absolutely right. I spoke about that modern worker persona that we have going on. That is an absolute fit for that user and that persona, right? They don't need heavy endpoints. They don't need those. So the Chrome OS makes absolute sense in that space because they are only looking at the browser. They don't need any heavy CPU lifting and GPU lifting and these things. Although there are those in the various devices from the various vendors that supply it. The user just needs access. They need the right access, the right context of access, and the browser is the way that they're going to do that.
And IT teams are looking at simplification, removing complexity at the same time. And if they still have those applications and a need to do so, they can securely deliver them by Citrix, centralize that information, including where their data is.
Even managing the device, the simplicity of the Chrome OS and the devices themselves are very simple to manage through Google. So it's not even complex to manage the endpoint in those respects when needed.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. And if we look at the Google and Chrome Enterprise Premium offering that deep integration with the browser engine, that faster protection against zero-day exploits, built-in enforcement capabilities, and the power of Citrix and Google together, when you combine it with the secure private access, there is now a very clear and simplified way organizations can enable a security posture that's responsive, scalable, and frictionless. Perhaps I can ask both of you if you can give one piece of advice to a CIO or a CISO who's navigating this shift to web-based applications. What advice would you both give?
It's always an interesting discussion when you get up to those levels within our organization. Probably the two things I always suggest is take the time to understand, right? Take the time to understand, again, the personas, the users. What is the outcome that the business is looking for when we're looking at these kinds of solutions? Understand the impact of deconstructing an old solution versus moving to the new as well. The second thing I typically talk about, and we work through this, and I'm very lucky in Australia that I've got some really good friendly guys I've known at Google for a long time, and they help me out with this. But it's to sit down and properly plan. What are your first use cases? What are your second use cases? Where are the low-hanging fruit versus the more complex things that you want to do within this? Yes, we can simplify the world, but there are stepping stones to doing that. And so working with the actual two vendors for those organizations is, in my opinion, absolutely key. So take the time to understand what you're trying to achieve and work with both Google and Citrix and the partner, ComX, to do that, right? Get them all in a room, work it all out, and have a solid plan before you start jumping down various technology road paths.
Thank you, Richard. And Noriko, do you have some piece of advice or information you would share with a CIO or CISO who is navigating this shift?
I think a lot of plus ones to what Richard shared. I see a lot of CISOs that want to come in and mark a legacy, right? And they're coming in fast and hard and like, we're going to just rip everything out and push everything in. I think that those are, ambitious, and I get that, but I think where I've seen better success, well, first of all, what that does is it sets up expectations that aren't necessarily aligned if you're going to try to move fast as well. So I think being measured and thoughtful, this is a transformational shift, right? Going from tech that's been around for 20 years, or that model of the network and the agents, and then moving whole hog to something, there are going to be gaps in there, but understanding where we can optimize first for where they can get immediate value is, I think, where we start. And through working through things, we can actually move them to a full place. So I think I really resonate with what Richard's saying, because there is the actual deployment piece that matters the most, which is where you're going to realize the value, right? Yes, the vision is there and the potential is there, but the most important part of it is how you execute. And being really thoughtful about how you're going to do that and being reasonable with your expectations on how you get there, I think is really going to be something that will help level set how you move forward here successfully. Because you can do a, I'll just say one last thing is like you can do a rollout with high expectations, and if you hit a wall badly, and I think this is really important. I see this with end user computing architecture all the time. Is you want to make sure your end user experience in navigating those changes is as smooth as possible. Because if you lose your end user, you're going to lose trust, and that's so hard to build that back between IT and security and those end users. So that's just another point I've seen, not just in this space, but just generally when I've seen these transformative plays when we're seeing customers going from on-prem to cloud, right? It's the same thing. You have to be able to kind of figure out where those workloads are, figure out where those users are, and start to move that shift. But it's possible now. And so if you're on the other spectrum of I'm going to wait for perfect, you're going to be too late. So you got to start now.
Noriko, you touched on executives coming in, wanting to make an impact and being fast around that, but you also talked about that transformational change and really looking ahead. Maybe Richard, what do you think of enterprise application delivery and looking ahead maybe next 5 or so years? What should organizations be thinking about?
Well, I mean, the challenge with most organizations, and I would love the utopia of modernizing every application that an organization has. The reality is they find it very difficult, or they don't have the skill set required to make that transformation, right? And this is where the partners really can step up in our world, is helping guide customers through that application transformation period, where they have an honest want to get from A to B, but they really don't know how, or they don't have the skills. They haven't got a plan on how to get there. So that is probably the number one thing that I believe is going to change over the course of time, because everybody sees the goal line now. The goal line is to modernize. It's to get to that browser experience. It's to get to all these things. But there are a lot of steps in between, as Noriko said, that have to be carefully weighed up, have to be carefully managed. So I see a lot of organizations, shifting to this browser model and this utopia of browser-based applications. The challenge is it's going to take some time. It's going to be a hybrid world of applications for a period of time while they're doing all this, and they need to approach it that way. They can't just flick a light switch and it changes. They need to take this approach. And so from my perspective, managing that hybrid approach and that hybrid world that they're going to live in, where they might have 2 of something for a period of time, or they move small amounts of users from one to the other as they go, and those kind of things. That's where our partner community really needs to step in and take control of that with those customers.
So Noriko, for you, looking ahead into the future, Richard shares some great advice there around partners and working there for the long term and really defining this out. But what do you think the future of enterprise application delivery could look like?
Wow, I mean, I feel like this can go many different directions. I think the web will definitely be one of those surfaces, but honestly, being able to see and do work through different modes of devices, ones that we don't commonly work with. I know that there's a part of Google that's working very diligently on, XR. So how does that work in enterprise, right? Where do workers get access to their data, right? Is it going to be on a computer, on a laptop, on a screen, or is it going to be a different screen, showing you? So I'd like to say I'm the oracle of those things. I think 5 years, honestly, so much can happen. I've seen so much change in even the last couple of years with where technology is going. So I'm curious. I don't think it's just going to be a desktop or a mobile device. I think there'll be new surfaces to do work. So that will be really interesting.
Noriko and Richard, both, I'd like to thank you so much for joining the Comics Connect series today. Such exciting insights and information around where customers have been, where they are now, and their considerations, and where they should think about going. So thank you both. We're very excited about working together with you both and your teams around both the Citrix and Google solutions and how that can help deliver a secure browser experience and digital workspace for organizations here in Australia and New Zealand. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to working with you.
Thanks for having me here today, Nick. Really appreciate it. Great to meet you, Noriko. I hope we work together in the future, and really appreciate everyone's time.